your entry into like where this started when you all sort of started coming together in this most recent, I mean, it's been going on for a couple of years though, right? Like this last negotiation.
Yeah, and as some of the media coverage in recent months has made clear, there was a great article, and I forget which outlet put it. This is 30 years in the making, and I hired him with the industry about the same time Matt did back in the mid 90s. And at that time, I was amazed at the conditions of employment in terms of train and engine craft. You just worked. But at least you could mark off when you wanted to, when you had had enough. And there were times where I would mark off for a week. I didn't get paid, but I didn't get disciplined either. And that's all gone away. And so the crux of the matter is that working people more and more have come to the conclusion that you have the right to make a living, and you also have the right to a life as well. Like, what a novel concept. 100 years ago, there was a strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and they called it the Bread and Roses strike. And the women took to the leadership of the strike, and they basically said, of course we strike and we fight for bread, but we want roses too. Which is to say, we want a life. We want to live. We want to have time with our family, friends, time to develop ourselves as human beings. And this is what the 8-hour day fight was about, starting in 1886. And the famous demonstrations all over the world where labor came together and united with the understanding that if any worker was to achieve an 8-hour day, that most likely we would all need to achieve it. And so this quality of life has all of a sudden propelled to the forefront as the big Class 1 rail carriers have pushed and pushed and pushed for 3 decades now, well, longer actually, and have taken away more and more manpower, have greater and greater expectations from Wall Street that everyone who's on the payroll shows up to work, and not just to work 30 or 40 hours a week, but 50, 60, or 70. Because Wall Street doesn't like more workers on the payroll than absolutely necessary. And so we're in this situation, and then throw the pandemic into the mix, and you heard for 3 or 4 months, finally, it was music to all of our ears that people who stock shelves in grocery stores are essential. People who picked up your trash are essential. And people who worked on the railroad, these are essential workers, not just out of some jingoistic expression, but without us, nothing else works. Like the great song Solidarity Forever, without our brain and muscle, not a single wheel can turn. And in the case of the railroad industry, literally. And if those wheels aren't turning, nothing else is going to happen. Well, we all took this to heart, whether you were teachers or trash collectors or store shelf stockers, railroad workers, or what have you. And by God, if we're essential and the economy can't do without us, then what in the hell are we doing coming to work when we're sick? What the hell are we doing being told that we're essential when in fact you're treating us like we're disposable? And so I think a number of things came together here in the last few months that convinced railroad workers we've had enough and we're not going to take it. Now, we're not ready to go on a wildcat illegal strike against the wishes of both political parties, all 3 branches of government, some of the most powerful corporations in the world, and our own union leadership. But the fact of the matter remains, the vast majority of U.S. railroad workers were ready, willing, and able to strike. And it's unfortunate that we actually were not allowed to, because I think it would have corrected decades of injustice and actually solved some of the huge problems that are facing the rail industry in this country. As it is, nothing has been solved, and we limp along with a very, very crippled infrastructure in this country.
We're speaking with Railroad Workers United, Jeff Kurtz, Ron Kinukow, and of course, Matt Weaver. From my perspective, and I'm looking at this from a couple things that I saw the other day, which I thought was very important. Number one, I saw a documentary regarding Boeing and how that corporation operated up until they decided to merge with McConnell and Douglas, and that was in the late 90s. And then, of course, we see what's happening right now with Southwest Airlines. And it's just pretty clear to me that the second Wall Street shareholders get their hooks in any line of work, whatever it may be, is when the work will suffer immensely, because it's all about the bottom line, and the bottom line involves taking from one and passing it off to the other. That's how it works within this system. That's how it works with the shareholders of the railroad workers. And the same is true for any of these other major industries. Can you talk about the effect that Wall Street and perhaps just overall deregulation of these industries has caused to the detriment of the workers, especially in your line of work?
And that's exceptionally true. Exceptionally true with precision scheduled railroading, PSR. Hunter Harrison brought that to the end, and it's all profit over people, higher profit margins, doing more with less, or lost upwards of 20% of their manpower, the men and women labor. We've gone from 150,000 to 117,000 rail workers, and profit margin went from CP to CN to CSX, and then all class 1 railroads are by the horns, and here we are doing more with, and the workforce is suffering.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me that it's privatized to the point that we're concerned with shareholders, but yet the president can come in and basically just shut everything down. So in other words, why aren't they then capable of subsidizing what needs to happen if your industries are not capable of providing for their own workers? This is very frustrating.
Well, what's even more ironic is that these captains of industry will tell you, stay out of our business, let us run our business. But when the workers threatened to go on strike, and they were on the verge of going on strike, the first thing that these people did was use the administration as their human resources and public relations department. They forced everybody back to work. Warren Buffett wrote a letter to the president telling the president not to let these guys go on strike. Every railroad followed the same procedure. They, were imploring the government, go after these people and make sure they don't go on strike. I've been, I hired out in 1974. I'm a third generation railroader. And I'll tell you, in 1974, I had a much better job as far as quality of life than these guys have now. So we've got to basically go back to the future, because these railroad CEOs and people like Warren Buffett, they figured out how to monetize our grief.
Yeah. Yeah. As Jeff is saying, even when I hired in 20 years after Jeff, the old heads, the old railroaders that I would talk to who had been on the railroad for 30 years, 40 years, dating back to the 50s and 60s, they would tell me, they'd say, oh yeah, you'd never mark off, call in, because you didn't want to miss the fun. You didn't want to miss the excitement, the joy of actually railroading. And granted, things were different in a lot of ways. But, the railroad has consistently, over my time on the railroad, has taken back more and more and more. And the irony, especially when it comes to the class 1s, is that the rail industry was not always this profitable. There were some lean times in the 60s and 70s. And as the railroad came out of that in the 80s with operating ratios in the 0.9, then it dropped into the 0.8 range. And then through my tenure, and same with Matt, into the 7 and 6. And now the target of these class 1s is literally a 50% operating ratio. And of course, this doesn't mean much to most people, but all that really means is for every dollar that we take 50 cents profit. There's no other industries in this country that are running at this level of profitability. The trucking industry Many of the big trucking companies, I believe, are making a 10, 15% profit margin. Railroads are up there with real estate and banking, and some circles believe that railroads are the most profitable industry in the country. When Warren Buffett bought BNSF, he realized, holy hell, it's a monopoly. I can't go wrong. It's totally essential to every other industry in this country, especially the movement of fossil fuels, which Warren is into in a big way. And so it was obvious he was going to make a lot of money. And then 5 years into it, he announced the BNSF had made him far more money than he ever even realized it was going to make him. And so in this context, the rail industry is moving less freight than it did 16 years ago. And here is really the crux of the matter. If you're a citizen of this country, if you're a shipper, if you're concerned about inflation, if you're concerned about the environment, you should be outraged, because rail is the most efficient, the most environmentally sensitive, the safest means of transportation known to humanity. The rest of the world is forging ahead with electrification of railroads and massively infusing capital. I remember a few years ago, Spain announced $40 billion a year investment to link every city in Spain with high-speed rail, which means double-track railroads. In this country, there's no double tracking, very limited siding extensions, no electrification, because the rail industry has figured out that to make short-run record profits, you don't do any of that stuff. You simply move less freight, you gouge your existing customers, you provide really poor service to the rest, and there's nothing much they can do about it. You cut maintenance, you contract out work, you furlough and otherwise get rid of tens of thousands of other employees, and we're on this massive cost-cutting treadmill towards super profitability. And so far, it's not sustainable, but so far it's working for them. And the stockholders are thrilled. They made record profits through the Great Recession of 2008. They made record profits right through the pandemic. And so it's disgraceful, and every American citizen should be extremely concerned about this great resource called the American rail system, the biggest in the world, and yet we are not putting it to very good use.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.